franchise secrets, Eric Von Horn.
Hey, in this episode of Franchise Secrets, I got my friend Derek Landino on. Now, he was in solar, sold that company, started a Burn Boot Camp, and then Everbowl. The guy's done a lot in a short period of time, and he's made a lot of mistakes along the way. Well, not necessarily mistakes, but things that he thought were going to work out that didn't work out. So he quickly had to change plans, and he had a backup plan multiple times. So we get into like what happened and how and why the backup plan came through from a lending standpoint and whatnot. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from financially, dealing with bankers, dealing with landlords and whatnot. So this guy's learned from a lot of free resources out there, from my Facebook group to my podcast, other people's podcast, to like dealing with vendors and learning from them. So I think this is a really good episode because you can learn from anyone, and you just need to listen to the right things. And he gets into what he listened to and how he took action on those things to really help grow his brand to where he is today. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Derek. Derek, man, we've been trying to get this thing recorded for a long time. I'm so excited for this one. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be here today. Finally, we were able to make it happen. So that's exciting. I was like, does he actually want me on this podcast, or are we just...
I know. And so it hasn't been easy getting this thing scheduled, but we got it. And you have a couple different brands, you and your wife. We met officially at Front Row Dads. So you're part of the Being a Good Dad group, and you're in franchising. So like I had to get you on. So we got a lot of things that we're going to talk about. One of the things we're going to do is kind of go deal by deal, because you've done it like none of your franchises that you've opened up have kind of been the same cookie cutter, get them up and open, finance the same way. So why don't we start with a little bit of your background? Like, go before franchising, what were you up to?
So I don't have your traditional, I guess, upbringing of a career. I actually started in the door-to-door industry back in 2011. And I never would have imagined in my life that I would be knocking doors for a living. And I was hooked, though, once I got in 2011, got into solar 2012. I became one of the top door-to-door salesmen in the country. And from there, I ended up starting my own office and like our own branch within the company. Had an amazing run running my own teams. And then in 2016, one of my best friends and I, we decided to start our own solar company, and we were a sales only organization. We really wanted to create something premium customer experience, that white glove service. And we were not finding installers that could do that and deliver that experience for us. So we decided to take all of our money and invest it into operations company as well. Everyone told us not to do it, that we were idiots, that managing a solar company and the cash flow is one of the hardest, businesses they've ever done. And we did it, of course. And over about 5.5 years, we became one of the top premier solar companies in the Southeast and Midwest. And it was amazing. So I ran all of our operations. So I was one of the co-founders and COO of the company, ran all of our operations systems and processes. And then in 2021, we were acquired by one of the largest national installers in the United States. They acquired all of our assets, all of our human capital. And that's kind of what, after that, got me into look into what is the next thing that I could do. And we decided on franchising.
So you probably didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. You had a nice exit, but it wasn't life-changing. So that's why you kind of wanted to look what you did next. Is that it?
Yeah, it wasn't life-changing money by any means. We did well. A lot of it, actually, the structure of the deal was like more long-term. We became a sales org for that company, and we just had really good kind of like red lines. And so we did well, but, decided, hey, like we should do something next. And this is the first time I actually ever invested in anybody but myself. So my wife had been a part of a company or a franchise called Burn Boot Camp. She started off as a member, and then became a trainer, and then a head trainer. And she just fell in love with the organization and what it stood for and what it did to her, not only physically, but mentally. Well, she always said, I want to own one of these one day. And so we just sat there one day. I said, hey, now's the time during COVID. Now's the time to invest in one of the during COVID. And it wasn't necessarily my idea at first. It was just all the people that I followed around me that were much, much more successful than I was. I seen them doubling down and saying, hey, now's the time to double down. And so I said, hey, if they're all doing it, we should probably do it too. And so we were able to negotiate, a good franchise fee because at the time, not a lot of people were buying franchises. And so we negotiated a great franchise fee, and we decided to buy 2 Burn Boot Camp franchises. And it was the scariest time of my life because, again, I was investing into my wife and not myself for the first time. So that was scary. We then are a family of health, and so we love acai bowls. And we've, I've probably had almost an acai bowl from almost every, acai company out there. And I guess for the most part, I really wanted to invest in an acai franchise. And so I just never really found one that made sense for us. And then, when we started getting into franchising, I knew, okay, I need to listen to podcasts, get on Facebook groups. And of course I found Eric Van Horn's franchise podcast. So I was listening to it, and this is no joke. I started from the very bottom. So this is what I always do when I pick a franchise or a podcast. I start from the very first episode, and I just work my way all the way to the top. And so I've listened to every one of your episodes. And during that, I'll never forget, I was on a treadmill at Lifetime Fitness, and I listened to Jeff Finster's podcast with you about Everbowl. And I called my wife and I said, hey, this is it. This is the one. I listened to the podcast. I actually know somebody else that's investing into it as well. And so I flew out to Utah, tried their product, and said, yep, this is a no-brainer. Best acai I've ever had. We need to invest in these. And so I bring in one of our best friends, and so we invested into that together. And so those are our 2 brands that we have, Everbowl and Burn Boot Camp.
That's awesome. I just learned a couple of days ago that you had listened to every single episode of the podcast.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of kind of the things that we will talk about today, those things didn't just happen by chance, right? There were small things that I did in preparation just from the vision that I had. And whenever I do anything, I want to know everything I possibly can. I'm a self-educated guy. I did not go to college. If it wasn't for sports, I probably would have dropped out of high school. And so for me, it was, I need to learn everything that I can. I need to self-educate myself. I haven't, growing up, I didn't have like the best mentors and things like that. And so I really do utilize podcasts and social media today and books to further educate myself.
See, I think that's awesome. I want to spend some time talking about this and weave it in the podcast, because there's a lot of people that are listening that will never join my mastermind, pay any mentor, or do anything. And that's completely fine, because they are learning and they're taking action on the things that they learned. You can join, you can pay for a mastermind, you can pay for a coach, pay for a mentor, and at the end of the day, still not do anything with the information, with the help. And so it's people like you that motivate me to keep doing the things that I'm doing, and motivate me to do some of the things I've been sitting on. So I love this. So let's start diving into some of the deals, like maybe deal by deal. Like, how did you structure things? What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah. So starting off, when we bought Burn Boot Camp as a franchise, those were the first 2 franchises that we bought. And when you're just a normal, average person and you pay those franchise fees up front, that's already somewhat of a blow to your cash, right? To your cash that you have. And so one of the first things I did to kind of back up a little bit is, because of your Facebook group and your podcast, I can't remember if it was the Facebook group or the podcast, but I think it was the podcast. Somebody said, if you're gonna, need to raise money at some point or get loans at some point, you're gonna need to utilize local banks. The larger banks are really hard to do those things, especially when you're a newer franchisee. And so as soon as I decided to get into franchising, I actually closed down my bank accounts with Bank of America, and I opened up a bank account with it's Ameris Bank. They're a local bank in Georgia, And I actually now have about 15 bank accounts with Ameris Bank. And what I did is I went in and I introduced myself, and I started bringing them cookies, crumble cookies, about once a month. I would bring them crumble cookies whenever I opened up a new account or was starting anything, a new business. I opened up personal accounts with them. And what I did initially is I asked them, I said, hey, do you guys have like a VP of business development or finance? I'd love to introduce myself. And so they loved me. The ladies in the bank, they loved me. And so I'd go in there and talk to them, bring my kids in there. And they did introduce me to a lady. And so we started talking. I just told her, I said, hey, I'm not ready for anything right now, but I just want to give you my vision and tell you who I am. This is what I want to do. This is my vision. And I hope at one point we'll be able to work together, but I don't necessarily need you right now. And that was it. And so kind of just started that relationship and then closed the books for a little while. So with our first burn boot camp, to kind of piggyback off of that, we decided to go the SBA.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So during that, so I've said that multiple times, probably on the podcast. I don't know in the Facebook group or not, maybe just a little bit, but definitely inside the mastermind sessions, we go deeper into that and why you want to build relationships with local banks. And so, like I said, I spent a lot of time in the masterminds talking about it, especially during COVID, when that was all going down. But it didn't matter if it was in the mastermind where I talk about it a lot, or if it was one time on a podcast. Derek, took that and put action behind it, and with relationship, because that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You're building a relationship with these bankers. So I've had really good experience with local banks. When we built out 12 solo salons, we didn't have just one bank. We ended up having 2 community banks that put out a bunch of money, and we started to understand how they underwrite things and why they do certain things the way that they do them, so we could understand their mindset, what kind of parameters and guardrails they had to work with, so we could, get all 12 of our $1 million plus locations open up within a 5-year period. So we wouldn't have been able to do it without 2 local or regional banks. So super important. But the point of it is you took action on that. So keep going.
Yeah, it's very important, and relationships matter. And I never would have thought a relationship with bankers would matter, but it definitely does. And so again, I made the relationship, started that, and so for our first burn boot camp that we opened up, we decided to go the SBA route, and it was very long. You had to pretty much give them your entire life in order to get this started, right? And so we had to fill out a business plan. We had to give them just tons of tax records and all kinds of information, right? So there's a couple key things that I did not know when getting an SBA. So this is going to be important for all of you out there. Number one, when you get an SBA and they approve you, that does not mean that you're going to get that money up front. So you have to be able to front a lot of the cash before you actually get your final approval. And even after that final approval, you have to make sure that you could pay for these things and they're going to reimburse you. So I did not know this. And throughout the entire time, I think we were already probably, I don't know, halfway through our build out. We still didn't have like our final approval. I thought we did. And then they're like, oh, we still need all these things now. And I was so scared the entire time. My wife and I were just like, man, I hope this goes through. We can't, the whole build out with the build out, the construction, everything was just about $400,000. And we were like, I don't have, that kind of cash just ready and available to do this. And so we did get fully funded though. And the other thing that I did not realize with the SBA, and again, this was just my inexperience, when asking for a certain amount of money with the SBA, you actually also have to include your build out cost. I did not realize that because I'm like, well, we're getting TI money and that a lot of that TI money is covering the build out costs. So why do I need a loan for that amount of money? Well, the SBA, just in case something were to happen, they have to be able to cover that amount for the build out. And so we had to end up getting more money to cover the full build out, and then which in turn made us put down more money as well, because it's like about 16, 17% down for the SBA. And so that was a massive learning curve. But I kept telling my wife, like, at the end of the day, we maybe wouldn't have this gym if it wasn't for the SBA. So I highly recommend for anybody just starting out, definitely utilize the SBA. It is a long process, but you just the entire time should be thankful that, hey, this is there for us to utilize. And I just kept telling myself that because it was a lot of things to fill out. And I just kept telling myself, we're very thankful for this because, again, we may not be able to open this up if it wasn't for the SBA.
So first one, SBA, first burn, SBA. So how long between you opened up location number 1 and location number 2?
So location number 1 was open, right? And so we ended up opening in 2021. And we actually did not get our TI money. We had an issue. The landlord sold in the middle of our build out. The landlord sold. It was a big landlord. We're right next to a Best Buy. So they sold to another landlord. And my GC did not get like 2 things to them prior to the final close of the acquisition. And so here comes the new landlord now. Well, now they're requiring all kinds of more things and details and due diligence. So we actually did not even get our TI money till the following year. So we opened in October of 2021. We did not get our money until like March or April of 2022.
So you're talking about a 6-month when you probably should have had it within 30 to 60 days. That's a good point though. So just kind of lessons there. Anytime you're dealing with getting TI back from the landlord, like you need to be on, as an owner, as a franchisee, you need to be on your GC because they're done. They've been paid or paid for the most part. Like they don't really care about getting all the receipts or the final invoices, mark paid or whatever it is to your banker. It's the last thing that they really care about most of the time. So you as a franchisee need to be on it. And even though they say, hey, everything's done, everything's ready, or the landlord is not in a hurry to pay it at all. So you got a GC that's not in a hurry to get everything to the landlord. The landlord's not in a hurry to get anything from the GC because it means they're just going to be out of a lot of money. So you as the franchisee just need to really quarterback the 2 things and always be following up to make sure that they get what they're supposed to get. And the GCs need to get, basically items that their subcontractors did. They need to mark those as final and paid. And so there's just a lot that goes into it. So if you've never gone through getting your tenant improvement dollars back, just trust me, ask what the landlord needs, ask the GC to get it. Otherwise, and plan. When you're planning your cash flow, plan for delays because it usually never happens as quick as it's written in the contract.
Yes. Yeah. And I was very detailed with it all, knew exactly what was needed. If I could go back and do it over, I would have actually told the SBA to please hold the money back to paying the builder until he collects everything and gives it to me for the landlord. And that was where the mistake happened is the SBA paid him while he got his money and he still followed through, but it just took him much faster than if he would have still been.
Yeah. If he was hungry to get that stuff to them, it probably would have happened faster. Anything else anything that you learned in the transfer from one landlord to another in a sale? Have you learned anything on that yet?
The transition was pretty easy. They came out actually ahead of time and asked us a bunch of questions, asked us if there was any issues anywhere. And we were just honest and transparent with them on some of the issues that we were having with like the roof and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it was pretty easy. They sent us documents. We forwarded it to our attorney and our attorney, would review it and say, hey, yeah, you're good to sign. I think it's like a transfer or something.
So when you're dealing with that, where most people notice it is in your your CAMs, because the property value goes up because it's recorded when somebody sells it. And so if you were part of a landlord that owned it for a long time and they hadn't really been appraised at real market value, then all of a sudden those CAMs get raised to market value because of the taxes that get paid and that get passed along to you. So that's something that you just kind of want to pay attention to as well.
That actually did happen last year. I want to say, now that you mention it, I contacted my attorney and the landlord because I said, hey, these seem really high. So I reread my my contract, my lease agreement. And in there was a percentage that I couldn't go up past a certain percentage. And so I just kind of checked them on it. And they came back and said, hey, these are the uncontrollables. That is the reason why it's gone up. And so I said, okay, you're right. we'll pay it. But I did kind of just check them to make sure they knew I was paying attention to that.
Everything's negotiable. So with that stuff. So as you are negotiating things, just think about that, because that's a large expense. I mean, it can be a building that didn't have any real improvements done to it, and all of a sudden a bunch of improvements happen to it, and now you're paying on a new rate. So
yeah, and this is what I would tell everybody out there that's protected me. And this has happened on every one of my buildings, I feel like, or one of my leases, is the HVAC portion.
Yes.
So what I do really, really well, I feel like, is negotiate the HVAC side. And so every one of my leases, I have a $750 max per year out of pocket per HVAC unit until it's fully replaced. And in every one of my current leases, there's at least 1 to 3 of them that are pretty old, and we've had last year we had over $5,000 to $6,000 in damages and replacement cost, and I was only paying $750. And so that's a big one, is make sure that you negotiate something in your HVAC.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So, all right, so that's location number 1 with some lessons learned on tenant improvements and lease and LOI negotiations. All right, let's continue on, man.
Yeah. So location number 2 is actually, so we bought 2 locations, and to kind of go back, my wife and I's initial vision was to open 10 burn boot camps and 15 Everbowl locations. So we bought 15 Everbowl territories with my business partners, and we bought 2 burn boot camps initially. And one was in Columbus, Georgia. One was in Gainesville, Georgia. Gainesville, Georgia was opened in 2021. And we just could not find a space in Columbus, Georgia. In 2022 is when it was supposed to be open, was by the end of 2022. And we just couldn't find it. And I was not willing to just kind of just settle on a space, right? So we asked to extend our period of within where we had to open our second location. So we were granted an extension on that. And all of a sudden, I was telling my wife, hey, we need to continue growing, and if Columbus is going to be another 2 years, we still need to continue growing our portfolio. I don't want to go an entire year without having the second location open. So I told our franchise coach that at Burn, and there was a couple of burns that we had looked at acquiring. None of them were really what we wanted to get involved with. They just weren't that successful. And so we were introduced to a deal that was off market. So it was a burn boot camp owner that was not listed.
So did corporate introduce you to them?
Yes, corporate introduced us to them. Our first location that we opened absolutely crushed it. And so we were one of the fastest growing gyms of all time in the history of burn boot camp. It still is one of the largest gyms in the United States for burn, and my wife and her partner just absolutely crushed it in their team. And so they liked us. We follow protocol, procedures, we follow their process. And so they really wanted to continue seeing us grow. So they said, hey, there's some other owners that are open to selling, and they're remote. And so they're looking to potentially get out of it. Well, I found out what location that was. It's in Decatur, Georgia, and it was a beautiful new gym. And unfortunately, they fell victim to COVID. So they opened during COVID, and it was a rough go. Or they opened right before COVID. And it just, in this specific city, they were very heavy on COVID and procedures, and it just destroyed the gym. And so the gym never really was able to kind of get back to where it should be. And the owners, I think, they were great owners. They just were beat down a lot. Right. And they were just like, we're willing to just part ways if it makes sense. So we decided that we were going to buy an acquisition, something that I did not think we were going to do ever or even thought about. Well, I started getting into the acquisition, and I fell in love with it. Fell in love with the negotiating part, picking the P&Ls apart. And so we went back and forth. They started really high, and I just negotiated based on their P&Ls and kind of looked at what typical gyms sell for. Is it 1x, 2x if you have one location? What are the P&Ls, the profits look like, all these things, right? And so we came to terms. And during this time, I went back to the SBA, the guy that got me approved the first time. And so we're going through that same route again. Hey, we're going to get an SBA on this. I actually had I paid the the SBA, they have to do a national, they bring in a national company to do a full like audit on the business. And they did that, all the stuff. And my guy, he's like, hey, you're going to be approved. Everything looks good. It's going to be a full asset purchase. And so, we're going to still have to come up with some money, but that was okay. They were going to fund a majority of the deal. And the deal was around just under $200K. And so to buy this location. And so cheaper than you could get it for brand new, right? Opening a new location.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are two really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisor and you're frustrated that you're not awarding as many franchises as you thought you would, this is the reason I created the Franchisor Mastermind. If you want access to the information, the techniques that the best franchise sales organizations are using to award franchises, and you want what mature brands have with their playbook of having happy, successful franchisees that grow the right way, then you might want to check out the Franchisor Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections. They want the playbook to achieve both short-term and long-term success. They want to increase enterprise value in their brand. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com.
So cheaper than replacement costs. The sellers probably wanted to like price it using replacement costs, what they had into it or what it would cost. For like typically sellers want to sell something for what they have into it, which is typically more than obviously more than what it's worth, and more than it would cost to start from scratch. So, that's pretty typical among sellers out there. And then they get a dose of reality, and then that price continues to come down. You also had a banker look at that with the SBA, and they were able to you were probably able to use that to negotiate the price as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they came back with what they felt like the business was worth. And I just went back to them and said, hey, you're either going to get a cash buyer or you're going to get somebody like me that's going to use a bank. And no bank is going to pay over this for it. I'm willing to spend a little bit more money and put my own cash into it to cover what we need to. But if you don't get a full cash buyer, you're never going to get what you want. So I'm here right now. I want to buy this. I want to make this deal work. So we actually went back to them and we kind of negotiated that price. Well, about 2 weeks before closing, the SBA, the main boss, I guess, the underwriters came back and said, we're not willing to fund this deal 2 weeks prior. And it was because a couple things. And this is what really kind of opened my eyes here is they said, the business itself just wasn't successful. So the burn bootcamp that we wanted to buy, it wasn't doing well. It wasn't making money. And so they just were a little skittish on that. And number two, we were growing too fast. We were too new. And so I will never forget, my lender at the SBA said, hey, why don't you try us again in 3 years? And maybe we can, fund a deal. And I told him, I said, Alan, in 3 years, dude, I'm going to have 15 of these and I won't need you at all. Like that's 3 years is 10 years to me. And I just said that there's no way. And I said, I'm trying to build an empire here. 3 years won't work. And he said, well, you're probably not going to want to work with us then because we don't build empires. And that was his exact words. He's like, hey, I believe in you, but you're high risk because you're so new in franchising. Doesn't mean you don't run a successful business. You're growing fast. And the SBA doesn't like that. They like onesies, twosies. And so here we go. We have to pivot. And this is where that relationship I told you guys about, a year and a half in advance with Ameris Bank, my local bank, this is where all of a sudden now this kicks in. So I sent an email to Ameris. And at first I just talked to my wife and my business partners and said, hey, do we want to make this deal work? If so, I'm going to figure out a way to get this money. I just want to make sure we're 100% on this. everybody agreed. So I sent an email to Amaris and I just said, hey, I want to, and this is the way I worded this. I'm a sales guy, right? So I wanted to make sure it was worded properly. I feel like that matters. And so I said, hey, Crystal, this is Derek. I wanted to present you guys an opportunity to do our first deal together. And I presented it in that way of like, we're business partners, not a bank, not being super proper of, hey, can I have this money, please? It's, I want to present an opportunity for you guys to do our first deal together with me because I'm going to continue growing. And I know you guys want to see that as well. And she responded with, yeah, let's take a look at it. So I sent her all the details that I already had from the SBA. And I could not believe it. Within 4 hours, she said, yep, we'll buy the deal. Here's the terms. We're ready to fund in 3 days. And I'm like, she's like, are you ready? I'm like, no, actually, we're not even ready yet. Hold on. We still have a couple more things that we have to do with our franchisor. And I couldn't believe how fast she got that approved compared to the SBA. And I was like, I'm like, hold on, is this real? The terms were amazing. It was, if I want to say it was a 7-year term at a fixed 7% interest rate. And this was before all the rate spikes. And so I was like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'll take that deal. And and I had to put a little bit more money down. I think I had to put 20% down on that deal. But I was okay with that. And so we closed a week and a half later. That was it. It was very simple.
So let's unpack some of that for the listeners. Banks can do that. Like, just like what he said is not uncommon. I have some commercial real estate where I live, some like retail centers. We've got some restaurants as tenants and some beauty stuff as tenants. And like we have a relationship with the banker there. And like we can get stuff done because we have relationship. And so questions asked the banker is like, what is your approval process? Like, who has final say? Is this somewhere you have to go and talk to someone at the state capitol or 5 states away? Like, what is the approval process? And they come back and say, oh, it's so-and-so in our bank. That's like amazing. Or you just need to understand like what that approval process is. And that will kind of tell you like how quickly things can go. SBA, when we did our first Sola Salon Studios, we got 2 approved at the same time. And that doesn't happen very often. So we got 2 approved at the same time because, like you said, they're not building empires, but we knew we had to get 2 done approved at the same time, or else we would have been looking for, scrambling for location number 2. So you just need to ask these lenders the right questions. So think about questions that people should be asking lenders. We're going through it right now, Derek, with Stretch Lab, my business partners. I'm fully absentee with that. I give some advice like banking stuff and whatnot. But they are talking to the bankers and they're saying, hey, we're approved for this. We can get this and blah, blah, blah. And I go back to them and like, what is the approval process? How many can we do at one time? How does that work? What would cause this to not get approved? Like, what are the things that would cause this not to be approved? Because I'm the same way as you. Bankers will tell, I get leery of bankers because, or lenders, because they're like, hey, we've got this. This is all taken care of. You're good. And there usually is something at the last minute, like, well, we didn't get this done, or you didn't give us this, or this happened. And so you just need to find out the things of why the deal wouldn't work. And if you do think you're going to be able to build an empire with certain bankers, find out why you can. And they might just say like, yeah, you'll be approved. No problem. Like, how does that approval process work? Like, what do you look for? What do I need to do or show you to get loan number 2 or loan number 3? And they might come back and say, you need 2 years of tax returns. Well, that's not going to work. Or they might just need to say, you need 3 years of a profitable, of a cash flowing P&L. Whatever it is, you need to understand the rules of the game, or else, you're going to, not grow nearly as fast as you want. So anything that you kind of learn that you go back and ask or dig into.
Well, I would say you start to also kind of understand their appetite, like what they have an appetite for, right? Just by some of the deals you may be putting in front of them. And so I'll give you an example here. So about 4 months after our acquisition of Decatur and things were going really successful, well, remember I have this SBA over here with Gainesville. and Gainesville is crushing it. P&Ls look amazing, but I don't have a fixed rate. So this is the other thing with the SBA. I don't have a fixed rate. It's an adjustable rate. Well, right now, because of what's happened with interest, my rate's very high. It's like a 10.25% on, a lot of money, over $200,000. And so my initial payment has skyrocketed to what I'm paying today. And so I'm always looking at ways to improve the bottom line for the business. And I also now know that don't ever rely on one bank, right? So I no longer just rely on the SBA. I am always looking at other routes of funding, even if I don't need it right now. I get mailers all the time in the mail. Hey, if your business has X amount of revenue, I've called them. I've talked to them. I've got them on the back burner in case I need them at some point. It's unsecured loan. They'll give you money quickly. And again, that's only for one unit, but it's another form of funding. So at this point, am always looking at different ways to fund my deals. So I brought Gainesville to our banker. She's the VP of the business banking. And I said, hey, I want to ask you if you guys would be interested in paying off our SBA loan and funding this with another fixed term rate. And I sent them P&Ls. Well, she came back to me a week later and said, hey, we're not willing to buy this. And I was like, Crystal, and I kind of I'm like, Crystal, what do you mean you're not willing to buy it? It doesn't make sense to me. That I'm not taking no for an answer. Why? And she just said, it's just our appetite. We don't have an appetite for that right now. Maybe in another year, try us again. And maybe I'll say yes. It changes so rapidly, she said. And because I was like, I just need to understand this a little bit more. We have great P&Ls. Why would you guys not buy that? And so she just kind of gave me a little bit of background on just, they only want to buy so many gyms, right? They only want to buy so many, fast food stuff. And so they have these appetites, and it could change pretty rapidly based on the market and the economy. And so, they didn't buy that.
And all banks are like this. Like there's a certain funds that they allocate. When we're doing solos, they're like, hey, we are getting overexposed to solo. We're going to cap it here. And that's why there was a couple banks that we use. So those are good questions to ask. Why? Some people would just get a no. Okay, it's a no. And then there's a lot of assumptions on why it's a no. It has nothing to do with you or the P&L. It had to do with the appetite of the bank and maybe the person that is in control there, or how much money they have, or the exposure that they have. It's like, why do you have? Oh, you have exposure to, $10 million of Planet Fitness, loans. Okay, that makes more sense, or whatever it is. So you just dive in to understand, because then you go to the next banker and you're working with the next banker, and you have a much more intelligent conversation with them based on the conversations that you've learned from your first banker.
Yeah. And these are things, don't ever use the excuse that you're not a banker, you're not in that space. For me, I made that excuse about 4 years ago. Quick side note here. My solar company, we had an amazing profitable year, and we paid 2 different accountants to handle our personal account taxes and our company taxes. Well, that following year, COVID hit, and we decided to take a lot of that money and just, keep it in the business. We didn't lay anybody off. Well, then we got our taxes, and I ended up having to owe about $500,000 in taxes, and I didn't have that money. And I was literally in tears. I was blown away. I had no idea why. It didn't make sense to me. This was my first big business that was making quite a bit of money. And I always made the excuse that, well, I pay these accountants. They should be telling us the things that we should be doing to mitigate our tax exposure and our tax risks. Well, after that, I promised myself I would never, ever pay that much in taxes again. And I would do everything in my power to be able to sit across on the table with an accountant and have an educated conversation. And it's not because of my uneducation. And so that's exactly what I did. I've read multiple books on taxes. I've actually built a PowerPoint, and I presented it to over 100 people on just basic LLCs, tax exposure, tax mitigation and risk. I've flown out and met with a personal accountant, and I've asked him to explain these things to me. And so now I'm pretty good, I would say, when it comes to tax strategy. And that is very important when owning these businesses. But to my point is, I didn't want to use it as an excuse that, hey, I pay them to do that. No, it's at the end of the day, it falls on you. You need to take accountability for all things surrounded around your business. And that also goes to, banking. You need to be able to have an educated conversation with a banker on business and business formation and growth and all these things. And so I've chosen to really just educate myself and try to understand everything that I can and the why behind things, so that I can go to these banks or these accountants and have a educated conversation and really just kind of stop the, hey, I'm an idiot to these kinds of things.
So Tom Wheelwright is Robert Kiyosaki's kind of tax strategist guy. I had him on the podcast. It's back December 2022, December 7th, 2022. Title is Too Many Entrepreneurs Are Missing Out on These Tax Effective Investing Strategies. So I talked to so many entrepreneurs, Derek, and they are paying way too much in tax. Like, you need to pay taxes like on what you really owe, but like, you need to work the whole tax game. You need to understand it so you're not overpaying in taxes. You're not tipping the government. Like, why would you tip the government? You need to pay what you are legally supposed to pay. And if you want to tip them, pay them more. But I would rather give to charity, invest in the businesses, invest in the people, invest into my family, invest that money somewhere else versus investing or tipping the government excess capital that they do not legally need. So Tom Wheelwright is probably a good resource, that podcast that I did for people, but it's so true, man.
Yeah, great. I listened to that podcast. Tax-Free Wealth is the book I would start with. It's an amazing book, and it teaches you that taxes are actually a great thing. They're actually they scare us because we're uneducated. And the tax book is just a code book for entrepreneurs. And if you can learn the code, you can crack the code, and you can then mitigate your tax exposure and your tax risks. And so that's what I did.
Another thing for you self-learners out there, Garrett Gunderson is a great resource. He's he's well known in the financial world. Garrett Gunderson. Written a bunch of different books. We had him speak to the Tribe of Investor Mastermind, and 2 hours, and he just blew people away. And people are saving significant amounts of taxes. And you mentioned the word audit. I think you mentioned the word audit, or at least I've been thinking about. I'm going through an audit right now, and it's not scary. There's certain things that you need to do and don't do, and blah blah blah. But Garrett said, "I want an audit." He's like, I'm always testing different things out and whatnot. He's like, I want an audit so I can know that things are bulletproof. So like, two good resources, Garrett Gunderson and Tom Wheelwright. Get into both of their worlds. Listen to podcasts that they're on. Maybe I'll have Garrett on here talking about some stuff too, but like, that's up to you as a franchise owner, franchisor, to educate yourself on that. And then like, the savings are incredible.
Oh, it's unbelievable. This year will be my best tax year ever, and I've made the most money with our businesses. And so I would also say, I can't tell you enough, Eric, how much your podcast and Facebook groups have helped me. And so I'll kind of transition to the next. So even though we're small, we act as if we're big. What I mean by that is our accounting source. So we use Ceteris. Well, how in the heck did I learn about Ceteris? Well, I learned about it from Jamie Weeks, which is the largest franchisee of Orange Theory in the United States. And he also has some other franchises, but I learned about that because he mentioned them in a podcast. So what did I do? I researched them afterwards. If he's using them, maybe I should use them. He gave really high props for them. And so Ceteris is a accounting firm specifically for franchises. And they have an app that you can use. And so I pay them, and we utilize them for every one of our franchises. They make us look very professional, very easy to read all of our P&Ls, but I spend a little bit more money than, having one accountant manage all of our books. So there's one. Again, I got that from a podcast. Now, if we kind of fast forward, now we've purchased 2 gyms, and I guess because of that second purchase, we're kind of being talked about that, hey, we're open to acquiring more. So we still at this point had not found another location in Columbus, and we had somebody else. I had a broker reach out to me on another burn boot camp. Owners were wanting to sell. The owners told the broker, hey, maybe we'd be interested. Well, at the time, this was like 3 months after we just bought Decatur, and we're crushing this, right? Decatur, we've flipped it around. It's making money now, doing well in Gainesville. But I didn't have the funds to get a third gym. And so they reached out to me, and I just said, hey, I'm not really ready. I don't have the funds. I'm not really looking to purchase another gym. And he said, well, throw us an offer, and we'll see if we can take it. So I, asked for the P&Ls, and I spent 3 hours on my iPad making notes, picking these P&Ls apart. And one of the things that I found was they actually were including in their revenue the employee retention credit. So they were showing a much higher revenue, therefore than profits, than what they normally would get if they didn't get that credit. So once I showed the accountant that, we pulled that out of it, and I said, here's a fair offer for your gym. Well, in between that, a buddy of mine we were talking, and he's telling me that, he's looking for other investments and he's got a lot of money right now. I said, well, hey, if you got a lot of money, we're crushing it at Burn. And so you want to give me some? And that's literally, I was like, you can give me some if you want. And I really have not looked to raise money on the outside. And part of the reason is because I don't ever want to take somebody's money if I am not 100% confident that I can be successful and I understand that franchise. And so I really haven't wanted to raise outside money because I haven't had some of these franchises for long enough to know that they're successful. Well, with Burn, I was like, okay, we've cracked the code. I feel like we're successful. We know we can do it again. And so, and I really thank my friend for doing this. He said, hey, I'm open to it. Build a presentation for me. Well, I've never done that. Another thing, right? So what I do is I go and I start looking at all the presentations that I had found in the past from being on calls with other investors that were raising money for franchises. And so I built my own little investor deck. And then I went back to Justin's book, right?
Lifestyle investor, Justin Donald, my business partner in Tribe of Investors. Yep. We got a great book and great podcast.
It's great. And a lot of in that book, he talks about deal structures. Well, here we go again. So I'm like, all right, I need to structure a deal that works for me. And so I structured a deal that was a little bit unique because I didn't want to give away a bunch of equity. And so I structured a deal, was able to kind of build that whole investor deck from a lot of what I learned with Justin Donald. And anyways, at the kind of 2 weeks prior, I said, hey, I need the money if you guys are going to invest. And they said, hey, it's too quick. We can't pull the money out. We're not ready. I said, okay, all right. So there goes my funding that I thought I had for this third deal. Well, so I go back to my bank, the one that just said that they didn't want to pay out the SBA, right? I go back to the bank and I say, hey, here's a deal that I'm looking at purchasing. Do you guys want to have another opportunity to fund this? And I showed them, the P&Ls. I gave them the assets, and they literally the same day, yep, we'll fund it. I'm like, are you kidding me? Wow, this is amazing, right? So they wouldn't fund the one that's super successful. They wouldn't pay that off, pay the SBA out. But here they are. They'll do another acquisition, another asset purchase. So again, here I'm finding, okay, I'm starting to understand their appetite. They're below a certain amount, and they like these asset purchases. And so we funded our third gym through this asset purchase through our local bank. So this is the second loan now that we've gotten through them. Again, another fixed rate, fixed term, which is amazing. So, and we had to put down again some more money with them. So that was our third gym that we purchased. And so now we have an SBA loan and we have 2 loans with Ameris Bank. Well, we now finally have our 4th gym that we're opening, and we found a location in Columbus, Georgia. So after, a year and a half, 2 years of looking, we found it. And so, but now we've bought all these other gyms. We've spent a lot of cash to open these gyms. We know there's marketing, rebranding, all these things we're spending. Although the banks are funding, that purchase price, we're still spending the money to turn these gyms around. Right. And so I'm like, okay, how do I get, and at this point, I'm not really scared to know what my funding source is prior to moving forward, because I feel like I can figure it out. Right. So here we go again, though. 2 things that happened. Number one, I listened to another podcast by Jamie Weeks. And Jamie Weeks mentioned a company called United Leasing and Financing. Never heard of them in my life. What I found out, though, was that they fund all of his Orange Theory equipments, all of his FF&E, so furniture, fixtures, and equipment. They fund all those. So as soon as I listen to the podcast, I reach out to them. I introduce myself. I, tell them who I am, what my vision is. They had never heard of Burn Bootcamp, have never worked with them. So I had to send them the FDD. I've done a lot of due diligence. Well, here we are. It's been about 4 months I've been working with them, and they just approved me last week to fund all of our FF&E for Columbus. And so that was huge. Well, then within our negotiations of the landlord, the largest expense when doing a build out or opening a franchise is usually the build out cost, the construction, right? The making it what it needs to look like when you open those doors and open. So I was able to get the landlord to fund $245,000 of our build out costs internally. Well, what that means is I actually don't have to come up with one single penny to make the gym look like it needs to look for us to open our doors. They're not only funding it out of their own pocket, they're using their own GC. So I have mitigated, half of the cost of opening up a new franchise by utilizing the landlord. I just asked, and my real estate agent was like, I can't believe they're doing this. I'm like, well, you got to ask. You have to ask. And so now they're funding that. And then all of a sudden over here on the other side, I've got United Leasing and Financing that is going to do the first deal with me. And this is going to pave the way for future deals with them, they said. And so I'm paying a little bit more in interest. So my interest rate is like 10% on this FF&E, and I'm okay with that because I'm all about cash flow. And so, and kind of, again, just I want to get in with them. And so I'm willing to kind of, pay a little bit more money in interest. And so now I've got these two on the side. So now I only have to come up with my working capital and we're good, which, we can do that internally through our gyms that are operating right now.
And by the way, what he just described is something that we are actively doing with our stretch labs in the Maryland market. Like we have one, maybe two landlords doing the same thing, and we can use a finance through a leasing company as well, where we just have working capital to pay. So, because we thought about doing like a friends and family raise or a different type of raise for those, but we're finding the landlords are basically financing the whole build out and everything. And then you can get a equipment loan and you're just in it with like very little out of pocket. So a lot of different ways to do this stuff.
Yeah. And one thing too, sometimes franchisees will stay away from like the high traffic areas because maybe they're a new franchisee. But I'll tell you, those are where the big landlords are, in the high traffic areas, right? The Best Buys, the Home Depots, the Targets. Those are the types of landlords that are going to give you that TI money. The smaller landlords, sometimes they don't have the capital to pay to this big build out.
You need to know what kind of landlord you're dealing with. Like franchisees, you need to know the type of landlord, why they want to do what we just described, why they would want to just give TIs. Because a lot of what Derek described, they get higher rents for that. Like you're paying for it. They're financing it basically in a higher rent, which means the whole property is worth more money at the end of the day. So because of what we're paying as lessees.
One thing I've done with that with Burns is I've done 10-year leases, and that's what's helped me get that TI money and make it as high as possible. As I do a 10-year lease as well. One of the reasons for that is the economy. The way inflation was going, I wanted to make sure I locked in my rates for 10 years and not 5. I've heard horror stories of 5-year leases. And then right now with inflation, people are having to move because they can't afford to stay where they're at. And so I've tried to do 10-year lease. I know we're getting up on time. So the last two, I pretty much utilized everything at this point except home equity line. And I did that as well. So I had equity in our house. I took out a home equity line. And that's how I funded our Everbulls. So I fully maxed out my home equity line, and my business partners funded 50%. I funded the other 50%, and we opened up 2 Everbulls just with our own internal funds through a home equity line.
And that's super easy to do that. Do you have that fixed, or is that all variable?
So this is a funny story. So it was supposed to be fixed. They did not end up fixing it. And I found out, and I just by looking and doing my own due diligence on my payments, I just got a check in the mail 3 weeks ago from Truist Bank, paying me because they did an internal investigation because they did not lock in my rate when I told them to. And they actually told me I was, that I had to fight for it. I called them up, asked them about it. They said they didn't have the recorded call anymore. I said, no, I know you most certainly do have the recorded call. I will get my attorney involved if you don't find it. And they did an internal investigation, and they paid me about $2,500 in interest that I shouldn't have paid them. So yeah, I ended up selling my house, and so now I paid off that home equity line. But it's yeah, so that's how we funded it all. We at this point have 3 burn boot camps, 2 Everbowls, and we have a 4th burn on the way that is already all pretty much funded.
Derek, man, this has been fun. Packed full of just like actionable advice that people can basically take what you've learned over the past 2-3 years from listening to podcasts and Facebook groups and being around the right people. And you just kind of compartmentalized it and gave people a lot of things, from bookkeepers to like books to read and podcasts to listen to and just things to think about. So dude, so good having you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.